All right, we're ready to go.
Everybody in? Okay. It's 4 o'clock, so let's start. If people are late, pity on them. I'm Andreas Hammarskjöld, and together with me I have Phil here on the left. And we come from a company called 2 Point Software, and we're here to talk about our BranchCache for OSD toolkit that we have. First, just a little bit of raise of hands. Who's a technical guy in here? Everybody. Is anyone not using ConfigMgr here? Oh, yeah, 1 or 2 hands.
1 or 2.
All right.
Okay.
That's good. So who in here knows what the BranchCache for OSD toolkit is?
Excellent.
Not a single. Excellent.
Who knows a little bit about or has been using BranchCache?
Yeah,
Okay.
5, 10 hands.
Okay. It's always useful to know because in the past we've been, shall we say, accused of running amok with the technical side of things.
Yep.
So if at any point, obviously without disturbing the flow of a demo or anything, anyone's got any questions that pops into your mind when stuff's going on, just like raise your hand. It's a bit hard to see. We'll have Q&A at the end, but if there's anything that kind of pops into your mind at the time, just give us a shout and we'll try and answer it. Because there's a lot of technical content, there's a lot to take in. We're going to try and do not too many slides, but lots and lots of demos. So we shall see if it flies.
Yes. So we have a very busy agenda. BranchCache is one of these technologies that is basically it's not really foolproof, so to say. So we'll try to make a few mistakes as well in our demo so that you guys will feel at home.
Yeah, they're all staged. Yeah.
Not. But what we're going to do is we're going to basically take a configuration manager environment and implement our tool set, which is free, on top of that to make BranchCache work really well to deploy Windows 10. So before we get into all of the technicals, we have about maybe 5, 6 slides that we'd like to cover. First of all, since not a lot of people know what BranchCache really is, BranchCache is people say it's a peer-to-peer solution, but it's really a WAN accelerator.
WAN
accelerator.
We might say that quite a few times during this presentation.
Which means that it doesn't only do peer-to-peer, it also does, from Windows 8, Microsoft did a lot of work to implement deduplication within the transfer mechanism. Who in here uses deduplications on their Windows servers today for content? Yeah, a few hands.
Good.
BranchCache is basically, with the V2, the same thing as dedu. So if you try to transfer something that's already been transferred on a block level, not on a file level, it will basically say, I already have this in my own cache or in someone else's cache, and I won't transfer it. So it's very, very efficient when it comes to transferring static content, like WIMs, for instance, that are tiny changes over a period of time. You add a few patches or a few drivers to it, but the file is pretty much the same as the original one you transferred. And we'll cover that more in detail. A little bit more on the 101 stuff. BranchCache came in Vista. Nobody really noticed. Microsoft did a large push for Windows 7, but the V1 solution that was in Windows 7, it wasn't that good because the way that it calculated differences between files, if there was a small change in the beginning of the file, the whole file would have to be retransferred. Meanwhile, in V2, even though there's a small change in the beginning of the file, it'll work out that, oh yeah, it's only changed in the beginning, but the rest of the file is very similar. So we're not going to bore you to death with the technicalities of this.
No, we've done that before.
We've done that before. We tried that at a conference, and it was all quiet when we were finished. So we're not going to do that again.
I think it's a bit harsh, though, to say that the Windows 7 BranchCache is crap. It's like
no, it's very
slightly
good.
less functional.
But it's not as, I like to call it as the dedicated fat ugly friend or whatever, the Duff.
Yeah, the Duff. Yeah.
So
yeah, it's kind of the poor relation to the newer version.
But you could take with you how great the V2 in Windows 10 is actually.
Yeah, focus on Windows 10. It's perfect. Can't be improved.
So we started 2 Point Software when we looked at the V2 hashing and the those algorithms, and we saw that they were so awesome, and it was a big market gap. People didn't understand it. Microsoft didn't do a good marketing job to explain it. So we saw, well, here's an opportunity. So the first thing we wanted to do was to give back to the sort of forums and on the internet and the groups that we've been part of when we started IT. So we thought, well, Microsoft has all of these great technologies in the Windows 7, Windows 8 machines, but it's not really working, and a lot of people are complaining. So what can we do to make it work better? So that's when we built the BranchCache for OSD toolkit. And it's basically a bunch of scripts, some SQL reports, and some PowerShell scripts, some Visual Basic scripts.
It's fairly trivial, really.
Yeah.
But it does a lot.
But it does a lot. So this is what we're going to try to cover. And we're running out of slides. I think we have 2 more slides.
Yeah.
So the first obstacle that we found was that BranchCache doesn't work within WinPE, in the WinPE environment. So we needed to fix that. So we did that a while back ago. I hoped to release the updated BranchCache for OSD toolkit until we came here today, but we discovered too many issues over the last few days that we hopefully fixed them. We'll see in the demos if they are fixed. But probably next week that will come out so you guys can all get it. But everything, so we had the previous version, we had several previous versions actually. So we've done the WinPE creator, builds a WinPE version with BranchCache and bits in it. So you can do bandwidth control downloads from WinPE. The other issue was to basically get the task sequence to start using bits in a much better way. Who in here knows when the task sequence uses bits and when it doesn't? Very few hands. You know the little checkbox on the deployment which says download all the files before starting the task sequence? Yeah. If you check that, then it's using bits. But the ongoing on-demand task sequence, that uses pure HTTP and is not bandwidth controlled at all. So BranchCache from a pure HTTP level, as in when you open up a browser or anything trying to access a pure HTTP connection, that's only in enterprise SKUs. So Windows 8 Enterprise or 7 Enterprise or 10 Enterprise. Meanwhile, what bits uses is in every single Windows version except Home. So you want to use bits because it does a better job. So we had to fix that.
Bits is everywhere these days. It's in Windows Phone. It's they're putting a lot of effort into bits because it's so key to things like Windows Update. And you would be amazed when we came to analyze what Windows 10 uses bits for. It's everything from updating the tiles on the start menu to updating Google Chrome if you use Google Chrome, Adobe Reader. So it's pretty key to everything. Yeah,
Office Outlook. The address book sync is using bits to sync it. So if you have a large Outlook environment and you have a lot of addresses in that,
and if you do Office 365 updates in 2016 now, the click-to-run version creates a bits job per file. So it creates 1,000 bits jobs in order to get the update down there. So it's pretty much embedded into everything.
Yep. So we added a little tool which basically runs bits jobs even though the task sequence is set to run on or to download content on demand. So we use a feature in the ConfigMgr which is called alternate content provider, which is basically an API that Microsoft provides for other tools to do the downloads.
It's similar to what Nomad uses or OneSite, so basically plugs it into ConfigMgr in the same way. But we're just using bits as an ACP.
And then, of course, we built a download tool for also using for standard MDT, but since everybody using ConfigMgr these days, we haven't actually had a single request to release that, so it's on the back burner.
Yet.
But one of the biggest issues, though, which is kind of the underline, it's not actually part of the BranchCache for OSD toolkit, is the reporting. It's still free and it's a separate entity by its own, but I think that's a key issue that people have with BranchCache and always had. They think of it as a black box. You never know what it did. Did it save any bandwidth or did it not? Or people are still complaining? What's going on? So we built a lot of infrastructure around that to really try to visualize what's going on when you're downloading a file.
Quick comparison. So who knows a little bit or who's heard of the WinPE peer cache? Comes in current branch, came in 15.11 of ConfigMgr. So this is a quick comparison because there are things that BranchCache can do that peer cache can't do yet. Obviously things may change. So peer cache works completely independently of BranchCache. And I guess really, I mean, it's aimed at people that don't use BranchCache or, you know, just have Pro or whatever. But BranchCache, I mean, even in the documentation for peer cache, they recommend that you use BranchCache because peer cache can't do, for instance, applications or software updates. So to complete the picture, you still need a bit of BranchCache. But basically, BranchCache does partial content. Peer cache just does the whole thing it can do. Boot images, OS images, packages and programs.
And drivers.
And drivers, yeah. Doesn't do any deduplication. It isn't bandwidth aware because it's just using HTTP.
Yeah, and if no other peer has the data, it goes full throttle HTTP back. So it doesn't switch over to bits.
Yeah, so it's kind of a blunt tool, really. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with it in future versions.
Yes. I mean, the ConfigMgr team has never developed anything that's not been used before, have they? No.
No.
So what else? What is DO, Phil?
DO, again, there's been a lot of confusion. We get asked quite a lot, well, is BranchCache going to be sidelined? Because now we've got this new delivery optimization. Who knows what delivery optimization service is? Well, that's the service that delivers all of your insider builds, a lot of your Windows update stuff, Xbox stuff. It's very much consumer oriented, but it is in every version of Windows 10. It stems from a company called Pando Networks that Microsoft bought in 2013. It's kind of a little bit BitTorrenty aimed at the gaming community, but it did streaming, peer-to-peer stuff. So that's what it does. It's kind of invisible. You can configure it with a couple of group policies. I spoke to the product manager for delivery optimization, and she was fairly emphatic that it's pretty much for the small business stroke consumer market, really. And there isn't any plans at the moment to develop an API for a public API or anything like that. So it's very much for your Xbox users to stream stuff. Like I said, for OS updates, it's used as well.
Yeah, and all purchases, I think that's done in the Microsoft Store. So if you purchase an application, that could actually come from your neighbor's PCs because bits of it is stored. And the server side knows that, so it sends you over to your neighbor's machine to get it.
Yeah, there's a simple switch. Basically, you can tell it to only get stuff from the internet or from the internet and from your neighbor's PCs.
Yeah.
So it's fairly straightforward.
So here's some links for you to, I don't know if the slide's going to be provided, but if they're not provided, we'll make sure that we'll put them somewhere that you can download them on our website or whatever, but I'm pretty sure they'll be on the NICconf website.
Yeah.
This is just how you're going to get all the free stuff that we're talking about. This is an interesting slide. This is the last slide, I promise. This is where all of BranchCache goes wrong. The yellow
BranchCache goes bad.
BranchCache goes bad. The big yellow thing is where you see it kind of deteriorating down. Is where a machine is requesting content from the server at the speeds that are the kind of the orange and the blue. I think the orange is the actual and the blue is the policy. So if you set a policy to get data very fast, the server is not going to have time enough to calculate the hashes, and the client's going to say, the server is not really feeding me, so I'm just going to download the data and do my own thing.
So the way BranchCache works, basically, you need a hash. No hash equals no data. Content server generates the hash, client gets the hash, then gets the data. from a peer, or if the peers don't have it, gets it from the server. The basic rule to remember during all of this is that the hash generation side of things is really important in branch cache terms. Especially if you've got a DP with thousands of packages, and if you dump all of those packages on a new distribution point and you expect your clients to just start branch caching straight away, well, it's probably not going to work. So you have to give it time to generate the hashes. It's quite a CPU intensive process, but it's very important to remember, and it's a reason why a lot of people try out branch cache and give up.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Especially if they do all their testing on the same network segment as that they have their the server. So, for instance, in our demo that we're going to run today, we'll have our DP on the same, basically a single site with the DP on the same box, and on the same subnet we've got a bunch of machines. And you see some of the bits policy and how branch cache works and understands that, and how that creates a lot of headache. So. This is not really an issue in the real world environment, because typically your slow networks would take care of this, and because you will have a bits policy set and then it will be slow and etc. So, all right.
Let's go.
So, enough slides.
So who sets the bits policy in ConfigMgr? Because in the client settings, there is a setting in there to configure the bits policy. Anyone using that at the moment? Good.
Let's see if it's the. Can you see the screen? Okay. Yeah.
Yep. I think that's
Don't
good.
have to look at the.
That's fine.
Let's see if I can get that away. So, basically, let's do a skip back to branch cache 101 again. We have a service that runs on every single machine that runs Windows except home. It's typically set to manual, so it's not started. And if you run a little net command, you can run PowerShell as well. To get the status of it, it will say, you can see here. It's first when I ran it, it was set to be disabled. And it was stopped, and now it's running. Make sense? Then you could add show status all. Then you get a bit more.
So it's disabled by default. And one of the things we have to do as admins if we want a branch cache is we've got to enable branch cache. We've got to configure it. How big do you want the cache? How long do you want stuff to stay in the cache? That kind of thing. So it's all configurable.
Yep. So typically what you do is that, or a lot of people, and the documentation states that you should go and create a group policy object to basically enable branch cache. And there's a couple of different options here. But we're not going to cover the GPO because lately we've been moving away from using the GPO to enable a branch cache. And that's because there are a lot of configuration that we want to do that you can't do within the policy. And if you do settings in the policy, the branch cache client gets confused of the other registry keys that you created. So instead what we do is we either use a script. So you can have there's a couple of PowerShell scripts out there. You can find one link to one of them really good ones on our blog. And the other one is to use CIs, so configuration items to use PowerShell scripts within the CI model. And with the next release, we hope that we can have a pre-created module.
Yeah, so you can just import some CIs and get your branch cache up and running really easily. It's a good way of getting it out there, because obviously with the CIs you can monitor the progress of the percentage of machines that are complying.
Yep.
Easily.
So what we'll also release with the next version is a task sequence to basically enable branch cache for you and set all of these configurations. Typically, the number one thing that I would like to do is to change the port. Which application takes port 80 by default when it's installed? IIS. Anything else? Skype. That means that when you enable branch cache, it's going to say, no, I can't start because something's actually hogging port 80 for me. So you want to change that. So in the task sequence, we have 3 variables that you can set. Basically, if you want to serve machines when the laptops are on battery, it takes a little bit more CPU and a little bit more disk, so you can enable or disable that. Then you could set how long the age before content is automatically deleted out of the cache. Of course, if cache is used, it will still be used and it won't be cleared out. It's only static content that hasn't been accessed in 356 days. It's safe to assume that that is old enough. But you can set it to higher if you want.
You can, and in Windows 10, the cache is kind of dynamically controlled. It kind of polices itself a little bit, so you can set a large cache size on the client, and then if the disk fills up with other stuff, it'll dynamically shrink the cache, and it will use the last access rule to age out content. So it's easier to kind of set a large cache size and not worry about it too much. It's quite often a concern.
So one of the other things that we do is that we set it to distributed mode. BranchCache has a couple of different modes. It could be local only, which means it only looks at its own cache, doesn't talk to anyone on the network. Still an awesome way to, if you download a lot of things from your IIS servers over and over again, to use local data. It looks in its own cache. And its own cache is deduplicated as well. So if you download 2 files that are very similar, it will only store the deltas in between them.
We know of customers who actually use it as a backup or a sync tool between servers, just using local mode, so server A to server B, just using deduplication and branch cache. Only the changes get transferred each evening, so that's when you would use local mode.
And of course the other one is then distributed mode, is where it talks to any other machine on the network and is using a multicast broadcast that it does to find out if any other machine has segment of the same file. And if they do, of course they reply back. Then we set a big disk space percentage. On Windows 10 it's pretty safe to set big because BranchCache will see that you're running out of disk space and shrink the size automatically anyway. As Phil said.
I just said that.
And then we install our reporting tools, which is basically a binary that we copy in. Then we set up a event trigger to when bits is downloading a file from ConfigMgr, and we send a status message back up to the server. And likewise, when the job finishes, we send a status message back up how much of percentage was downloaded using BranchCache.
Simple.
The last thing we do is we have our little executable called bitsfist, which is basically the binary that takes a task sequence and enables it to use bits, even though it's set to download on demand.
Using the alternate content provider.
Yep. So let's take a quick look of what the toolkit kind of looks like. So we're up to version 1.4. It will look something similar to this. We have the reporting tools, we have the bitsfist tool, we have the WinPE generator, which is basically, all of these are little binaries. They don't look much, but some of them do a lot of work. We got some samples, some of these are the sample task sequence, etc., so you can start playing, and some of the scripts that you want to play with. So on the server side then, now we enable the client to use BranchCache. How do we do on the server side? What's required? Probably the number one thing that people do the mistake of is they go here and they read and say, this looks BranchCache for network files. That's what I want. And then click that and next and go. Now BranchCache, when it comes to network files, is for the SMB integration, which is basically when you open up Explorer and copy files from a UNC share. That could also be BranchCache. That requires enterprise though. What we're covering today is the bits integration, which is on every single Windows. But if you have enterprise, who in here is on enterprise? Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's, if you do a lot of SMB file copy over the network, you could use that to speed it up as well. It's a little bit more advanced than the HTTP one, but it works pretty well.
By advanced, you mean not that great? It works. It relies on the offline files feature, which kind of works as a read-ahead cache. So it tries to predict what you want. So it works alongside BranchCache, but as the dev team said to us a while back, if we knew then what we know now, we probably wouldn't have integrated with offline files. So it does work. It can be made to work, but caveat.
Probably if you want to shift large, I mean, we're talking terabytes of data from one site to another one, it's better to do that over HTTP than SMB because of the offline file cache. The other thing which we're going to cover a little bit more here is that what you want to click is the data deduplication. And why do we want to have dedupe on our servers when we're going to do branch cache? Because we talked about the hash creation. You saw the bar, how it went down when the clients were trying to get the data too fast. All of that goes out the window if you put the source that you're trying to download on a deduplicated volume. Because the branch cache hash and the deduplication data is the same thing. So what you're downloading from the server is actually the dedupe data that the machine knows about. And that is always calculated, so no matter how fast you try to get the data, I haven't been able to get it not to work. Because it basically just, yeah, I know where it is, here it is.
Yeah, it's in the dedupe chunk store effectively,
Yeah.
so BranchCache doesn't have any work to do.
So what you want to enable to get branch cache to work for HTTP is the branch cache feature, not the role. A lot of people make that mistake. So I've already enabled it. And if you're using ConfigMgr, you can go to your administration, go to your distribution point, and there's a little mysterious checkbox that you can't find much comfort or much documentation about. But when you click that box, what it does, it installs the feature for you. But it doesn't install the dedupe feature, which you should have on every single one of your DPs. And what's the snag with dedupe? It doesn't run on the system volume. So you have to have all your package content off your system volume to a separate drive or volume. It doesn't have to be a physical hard drive, just a different volume.
And also because of the way that the ConfigMgr distribution point stores data in the content lib, it's not recommended that you deduplicate your package source. You just want to deduplicate the actual data on the DP. So we've got a script that you can run that dedupes the volume, but you can exclude folders on that volume. So it's quite easy to work around.
Yeah, so what I'm saying here is on the C drive, I got all my content in the source folder, but on the E drive, which is a different volume, that's where I have my DP. And Microsoft perfectly supports having the dedupe volume on your DP. They do not support that you have your ConfigMgr source content deduped. And it has to do with something, the way that they try to figure out whether a driver is different than another one. They're using something in the NTFS that's not supported by dedupe, and it throws an error. But I only think it's the actual network driver or driver store.
I think so, but it's just safer to leave it alone. I mean, in most distribution points, it's unlikely to be on the same volume as your source files anyway, so it's all theoretical.
Yep.
Okay,
so
what's next?
Now we have the server set up. Then let's take a look what kind of configuration we need to do in ConfigMgr itself for this to work. So first of all, you probably have your task sequence. Oops, open up the wrong one, but I can do it. See if I can get them side by side. So they're very, very similar, more or less, exactly the same kind of downloads or in task sequences. The only difference when you want to deploy using BranchCache for OSD, you want to set the ACP, which is basically done by setting a variable that the task sequence will pick up. That one, they will know that when it's about to download content, it should execute our little binary, which is this one. The other one is basically enable BranchCache, which runs another one of our little executables. You need to give it a few parameters, like where am I going to put the cache? And typically you use variables to store it underneath the underscore SMSTS blah 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 folder. And then you could set which version of BranchCache. Do you want to downgrade it to use version 1 to work together with Windows 7? Or if you want to change a different port.
All of this is reasonably well documented. We don't just put it in a README file because it's quite complicated.
Yeah,
so
I think we're about up to 80 pages of documentation now, but we'll try to do even more. Because there is a lot of configuration that you can do.
It's just important that you follow certain steps. It's like a checklist, really, like anything in ConfigMgr when you're trying to set up a task sequence,
Yeah.
to make sure that you've got all of the moving parts in the right place.
We have a question. So the question is, why is BitLocker not on the left side? Because the download without BranchCache is a new one that I did on 15.11, which by default has it enabled. I'm running a virtual here, and I didn't enable the virtual TPM, so it failed, and I just got angry. The one, the task sequence with BranchCache, this one comes from an old 2012 R2 template, which didn't have the same. The template looks slightly different. So, but it was a very good question, because the new template that we're going to release will look something like this. So first of all, we have a pre-cache folder. That all it does is checks for an option. If a task sequence variable is called pre-cache doesn't exist, then it will run the task sequence. If it does exist, it will just download every single package. People love to pre-cache and know where things are. They have to, I need to know that it's all there. We try to get people to go away from that because BranchCache with dedupe is so efficient, and if you have a working environment, it just scales and you don't have to think about it. But people love to, I need to know that it's there. So they take the task sequence, deploy that to a bunch of machines with the pre-cache option set. They will download all of your content, put it into the BranchCache, and when you need it, it's there. Make sense? We don't like it, but we have to follow what our customer says sometimes. Otherwise, it's the same. Set the ACP, enable BranchCache. That always comes after when you set up your drivers partitions, because we need to know where to put the data. So then the move BranchCache step basically moves that content that you just downloaded in WinPE, so your Wim or your packages, etc., drivers. It moves it into the operating system that you deploy. So once it reboots into sysprep, unattended setup, blah, blah, BranchCache is already up and running, still serving other machines, and has saved the data. So that day when you come to push your updates, whatever, you already have a lot of content in the BranchCache store. Make sense?
So far, so
Are you
good.
with us?
Kind of.
Okay.
I think it needs to get a bit more exciting.
Yeah, let's try to run some of our own binaries and see how that works.
Oof.
So the first thing that you need to do is run the generator to generate your WinPE media, because it always goes through WinPE when you deploy a machine, whether you push or build from scratch. So you need to have the components in there. And the first thing that you're going to run into when you're on 15.11 is that you want to deploy Windows 10 586, right? The latest and greatest. And then it's going to say, well, no, because when you're creating the media has to be the same version as the WinPE version that you're using. And which WinPE version can 15.11 use? The old 240. You can't use the newer one. I don't even know, it's been months. If you want to have a fun reading about people complaining, you can go to that blog article. It's about 10 people ranting.
I'm sure it'll be fixed soon.
One day. But what you do is you point it to a, by the way, if you want to use the latest 586, it still works. It's just ConfigMgr doesn't like it. We work fine with it. So you point it to a kind of keyboard do you have, Phil? There we go. You point it to a media, enterprise, or education, or pro, or anything that you want, really. And then you point it to a WinPE media, which I think I just had one there. And the number ones is basically which index of these files is it that you want to use. Oops. Phil, your keyboard is killing me. There we go. I'm running a Swedish keyboard on a UK. So basically what it does, it goes out, looks at the files, and takes some from the install Vim and shift them over to your boot Vim. And it goes pretty fast, and I've tried to do it as foolproof as you can. In this newer version, something that probably Scandinavians like, I've added location support, so you could use Swedish or whatever you want, whatever language of WinPE to deploy it. But as you see, it adds quite a lot of bits into the WinPE one and saves it, and voila, we should have an updated one. Meanwhile, I will.
And then all we need to do is obviously update distribution points.
Yeah. So what you will do now is, if I do Explorer here, this is the boot Vim that I just created. It's only a couple of megabytes larger, so it's not much larger, but it then has the components. And you would then add that as a regular WinPE, and I think I did this one to save some time. I've done a few here. I haven't really named them well, but this is one that I created earlier. And then you can basically boot that one. And then when you come here, no, F8, no,
Oh,
what have I done now?
did you?
I don't know.
Not
Maybe I
enable
forgot.
it in.
Yeah, I think it's
Come
your
on
keyboard.
now.
I blame your keyboard.
It's my keyboard.
Do you have to
What
F function? Ah! So then if you do the same thing, net BranchCache show status all. If it all working, you'll see that we have a service that's disabled and it's not doing anything. So that's why we're in the task sequence had the enable step. That will basically enable BranchCache to get going. So if I look in I know this one is associated with the same boot image. I have my little variable to fill in, rig 11C63. I will click next. So we're going to partition the drive. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. And in a second, we'll come to the step to enable BranchCache.
So far, so good.
Well, you never know. Here we go. Takes a few things. It actually just stops and starts a lot of services. So, but it should work. And there you go. And there you should be able to see the download that's actually started. And if I then run my net command again, you can see. So we've now configured the cache to be under the SMS tagging sequence. You can see the cache size of active data, so it's already started populating the cache from the download. Make sense?
So where's it downloading from now?
From the server.
Hmm?
Or, if we take a look, probably the best way to do it is to do netstat.n. That gives you netstat.n. That shows you all of your connections. And you can see the 1337 port, which is the one that we selected in our task sequence. So you can see that we've actually connected both over IPv4 and IPv6. So BranchCache will always try to use IPv6 over IPv4 if it can. So it will basically try to use that because it's faster. If you look at the speed, you can see it's going pretty wild here. And the reason why it's being held back at about 60 megabits per second is because it's getting content from other peers. So this goes back, and I think this is a good time, meanwhile this is running, to go back to the server, let's go to my DC. And since you're doing all the downloads using bits, the bits policy comes into play. Basically, first rule, never use the ConfigMgr policy to download, because that's an old XP policy. It doesn't understand BranchCache. It will never do what it needed for BranchCache. So instead, there are two newer ones. Set up a maintenance schedule, which overrides the work schedule. So you have two different options. The work schedule is typically the one that you want to set.
Yeah, the problem with the ConfigMgr one is that it doesn't understand about any difference between a transfer that's coming from a distribution point or a transfer that's coming from a peer. So if you set a low bandwidth rate of say 200K in the policy, it's going to get content from the server 200K, but it's also going to get content from the peers at 200K, which is obviously no good. We want to get content from the peers on the same subnet really quickly, which is why we have the more recent policies.
Yep. So basically this is what the checkbox does. Ignore bandwidth if the source and destination is on the same subnet. What do you think happens if your DP in your home lab is on the same subnet as the client that's trying to get the content? Will the policy apply? No. Will it go full throttle? Yes. Were you lazy and you didn't put your content on a dedupe volume? Probably. Did anything get branch cached? No. Do you complain? Yes. I think this is one of the main reasons why people, even though they try to follow the book, they get into trouble, because the alternative is basically to say, I don't want to have this checked, and you set it to 1 megabit. How fast is the transfers between two peers then? 1 megabit. So even if you pre-cached everything on the machine, you boot up the other one and you try to build, and it's just going by 1 megabit. And you're like, this branch cache stuff really sucks.
So
and
the
then
moral of the story is just check the box.
Yeah, basically when you're doing your testing, try to get a network segment off. Use Vieta or anything. I use my favorites, remoting and routing and remote control from an NT4 box or whatever.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, I use the little Vieta. Who uses the little Vieta Linux router in the lab? It's really easy to set up. We
basically an ISO. You create a VM, boot the ISO, up you go, click a few things, and then you have a full router to set bandwidth and whatever you want.
Yeah, you can do quality of service, firewall, all that kind of cool stuff. So you can set up 3 or 4 subnets. It's great if you want to test, or if you want to emulate performance of ConfigMgr and bits, etc., between site server and remote branches, because you can emulate your remote branch environment pretty simply. There's a good blog actually on Johan's deployment research about using the Vieta on there. It's definitely worth checking out.
Yep. So let's take a look here. So in the I'm turning the Wi-Fi off, on and off. Let's see if we got that. Oh, while it's still downloading. Yeah, so we write a couple of register keys that you'll be able to see exactly where and how the content got from the different places. So after the task sequence is downloaded and all the data, you'll be able to find out where it comes from. So a neat trick to figure it out. See, we're kind of running out of time on this one. We don't want to wait long. Probably another thing we'd like to cover, like here's another machine that I did earlier, I think it was yesterday, and it's then completed, and you can see after the move command, it moved the cache back to where the OS basically will find the data. So if I go ahead, and you can see that also that it has its whole WIM and some other stuff in it. So if I quickly reboot that one.
Well, that's really important, isn't it? Because if you have a remote subnet and you build your first machine,
yep,
you want it to obviously preserve all of that in the BranchCache cache, so that the second, third, fourth machines can use that.
Yep. So while we're on the same subject, let's see if I can find my 60 machine. Connect. We have developed a tool to make the play when you're playing with BranchCache and bits a bit easier to find out what exactly is going on before or while the download is going, instead of sitting and waiting for the complete download to finish to then figure out, well, did it BranchCache or not? So
yeah, you had to wait till the job had finished really, and then go and dig around in the event log to see if it came, if it was doing any branch caching at all, and even then it didn't really tell you how much.
I think the font is probably extremely small, but
a little bit, but you get the idea because it's got colors.
Yeah, it has colors. It'll look more fun when you have. So this is a job where it hasn't done so much branch caching that we did earlier and trying to troubleshoot. And typically, what you can see, this is 3 different files that we downloaded, 3 different WIMs, 3 different install WIMs. This is the 1506 install WIM. This is enterprise for 240. And this is education for 240, which should be very, very similar. But you can see here, what happened was I didn't have the bits policy set. So my machine tried to download content very, very fast, and the server didn't actually have time to calculate the hashes and give it in time to the client. So the client didn't branch cache. So the gray means absolutely nothing. But when the server caught up, the light green is 100%, blue green or darker green, not blue green. Darker green is high 90s of success. So it did a lot. But then we reran the same test again. You can see we downloaded 3 files, close to 10 gig. But if we go to the client side for branch cache, if I find the right window, you can see the cache size. So the number of bytes it has in its cache is only about 6 gig. So we shaved off about 3.5 gig, almost 4 gigs out of the downloads of those 3 files. Now typically the 240 or 240 WIMs are very, very similar. So the third WIM that we downloaded, more or less 100% came from the cache. So the cache itself is deduplicated. It would only store data that is entirely unique. Make sense? So I think if I rebooted my, is it 61?
You need to give them more meaningful names, I think.
Yes, probably. And then, hopefully if I can do an etch, BR show status all ass.
Freudian slip.
I typed it. Where's the pipe? It's on yeah. I should know this. No?
Come on now, try more.
Right, we'll do it that way. So, I'll have to pipe it out to a text file then. Why can't I find a pipe? Oh, God damn it.
You want the actual?
No, I want the pipe symbol, yeah.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, but it's...
No,
there, yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
There you go. So, even though the machine is still rebooted and it's downloaded, typically now download all the apps, Office, etc., 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 that would just add to its own cache, serving out to all of the other peers, so that all the downloads is basically downloaded once and always shared across the other machines through the entire process. And it's always with the help of dedupe, made sure that content within the same package is very similar. So anyone doing a lot of multi-language stuff are very good for dedupe, because they're very similar, the files themselves. So that kind of takes it to how you do a bare metal machine. If you would then do a push, that would be exactly the same thing, but instead the download could happen before you push the OS, for the people that, I want to know that the content's really there before I do it, or on demand, and then it will download, for instance, the WinPE and some other stuff to take the USMT data, etc., before rebooting to WinPE, pulling down the WIM. But the nice thing, if you pull the entire data content down first, you can save the cache from your old OS when you're in WinPE. So BranchCache can always upgrade older caches. So if you downloaded everything, you get to WinPE, you can access your old hard drive, you can then move that data storage into your current one. It's just a file copy. It's not supported, but it works really well.
But it works.
And then it will upgrade that one and then start using it. Of course, the packages would in that case would already be from the CCM cache, if that kind of makes sense. Is it cool? Sort of.
It can be
Sort of.
sometimes. Not quite
Is it very
sure
confusing?
about it, really. So, anybody got any questions? Everybody's too frightened
Not a
to ask.
single question. And then
Everybody's
typically
got loads
failed.
of questions, really. We used to give out free beer
Yeah.
for every question, and then we got lots of questions.
Anything else that you'd like us to cover? We have more, of course, but I think probably all of your brain is going to be...
How does it work again?
How does it... What did you say? We do have a reporting pack as well. It's quite easy to install.
The trick with BranchCache and bits and implementing it and doing what we've done is to take it a small chunk at a time. Obviously, we've shown you a scenario where you're using all of your knowledge in one go, and you're putting it all into a task sequence that's hopefully does everything it should and it's really efficient. But if you're starting from scratch, I'd recommend just getting to grips with BranchCache and bits and doing a bit of testing, which you can do. You can just set up a PowerShell script just to download some stuff from your distribution point. We've got a blog article on how to do that, how to test bits and BranchCache. So, and that just gives you a basic understanding before you get too carried away and break it.
There is quite a lot of data if you know where to look. For instance, where I did my testing earlier, if I go in here, the bits client, when it's does a download, is basically what we use as source for the reporting, or some of it. If you go to details of an event 60, event 60 means that the file's completed download. So if you look at that, go down here, you'll be able to see some quite interesting stuff. So the number of bytes transferred, and then you could see bytes transferred from peer. And of course, if you're the only machine on the network, that I was in this case, that means that that data was deduplicated. So it didn't even try to download it. It had it in its own cache. If it didn't have it in its own cache, it could still have gotten 100% from another peer on the same network. So, but still, even by just using local mode, which doesn't use any communication to other peers, you could save a lot of bandwidth downloading WIMs and updates.
It's just moving files around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any of the reports?
I ran we
Quickly.
have a little PowerShell script that adds in all of our reports. It didn't fail.
We haven't got much time left, do we? Have you got any reports set up in there? Or?
No, I don't
No.
think so.
The reports, once you get going, the reports are quite useful because they tell you things like your global success rate of BranchCache, so you can tell at a glance if things are going well or not. It'll tell you the percentage of bandwidth that you've saved, what came from the distribution point, what came from peers, that kind of thing. And so there's quite a lot of customers using that out there to give them an idea of how BranchCache is performing.
Yeah, and that's kind of typically, before you deploy it, you probably want to start playing in the lab, etc. And then think of the things that we covered today, which is probably the first thing you're going to run into, is the same subnet issues, the servers not calculating the hashes fast enough, etc.
But it's easy, really.
It's easy.
It's easy when you know how. You can get, the bottom line is it's free. If you got enterprise, then BranchCache is free and dedupe is free.
Yep.
You might as well use it, and if you're going to use it, you might as well use it in the best way you possibly can. And ConfigMgr is quite BranchCache friendly. All the checkboxes are there, you just enable it, and off you go. And it works really well. There's some huge customers using it all over the world, thousands of sites. Just BranchCache out of the box, leaving aside any of the toolkits that we do.
Yep.
So I would recommend that you have a play with it.
Yes. So unless anyone has any questions, I think we're about a few minutes earlier. Yeah, here's one.
Question? Sorry, could you say that again?
Is it the client who calculates the subnet?
Oh, is it the client that calculates the subnet? So, yeah, it's subnet based. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
What was the question?
Is it the client that calculates the subnet? So BranchCache is subnet based. So if you've got two subnets at a site, it's going to do two downloads from the distribution point.
So the multicast boundary is basically what it's using. So if the switch allows a wider multicast boundary across multiple subnets, that message will be across, and that works fine. So just there's a caveat that I found yesterday on that, is that the default Windows firewall policy blocks non-local multicast transfers. So you have to create a custom firewall rule to enable it. Otherwise, it will be blocked in the firewalls. But as long as the multicast goes across, there's nothing stopping a client from one subnet accessing data on another subnet. It could even be over a WAN or whatever, as long as it's doing the HTTP connection. But it needs to know where the data is, and that's why it's using the multicast WDS discovery methods. So the peer will then send back. We typically don't recommend using multicast over multiple subnets, mostly from a people and process perspective. You have to talk to the network team, and then they have to talk to the security team. And the bigger organization you have, the more of a minefield that actually turns into being. But it works really well, so technically possible. Did that answer the question? Yeah.
Any more for any more? Awesome.
Perfect. Did you like what you saw, or was it too technical, not technical enough? More demos? I think it's that this is our 6th BranchCache session. They've all been slightly different, so we'd like to have the feedback. We tried to have a different approach each time, but
Well, it's always interesting to see if there's any... Sure. In ConfigMgr, I mean, BranchCache doesn't really care about. You mean about the boundaries in ConfigMgr? Yeah, I mean, BranchCache doesn't really care about boundaries. I mean, you can have clients that are not even part of ConfigMgr. They can be in a work group on the same subnet. It doesn't matter. All BranchCache cares about is content, and providing it has permission to get that content from the distribution point. Or the hash, it has to have permission to get the content, then it can get it from peers or the server.
Was the question around if it cares about the boundaries, etc.? Yeah, no. So the only kind of thing that it does with the distribution is if you have the download locally or not. But typically, this is your setting that you would have. I mean, and then you could check the checkbox, but it uses boundaries to figure out if the DP is local or not. So, but BranchCache doesn't really, it comes after that. So ConfigMgr might say you don't have any content because it doesn't know about that you have BranchCache content. It will say you can't access this URL. But typically, if you're using BranchCache, you would either do your boundaries to expand your remote sites as well, or you specify when no local distribution is available, use a remote one. Make sense? Well, thank you for coming.
If you think of a question afterwards, just catch us anywhere and ask us.
Yep.